Hello and welcome back to the 5 Minute Film Club, and Happy New Year! Apologies for the long time between my last review, which was absolutely hundreds of days ago. However, today's date couldn't go without a review from me of Friday the 13th, the final chapter. Released in 1984, the film picks up on the same night as Part 3, with one of the most stylish openings to a Friday film, I think. Jason's supposedly dead body is taken to a nearby morgue. However, after some tomfoolery between a nurse and a doctor, you watch this film and you also watch Halloween 2, which I reviewed, and doctors don't come off in a very good light in slasher films. Basically, their patient care is very much lacking, and the attention that they pay to each other, anyway, the fun between the doctor and the nurse wakes Jason, and he gets back to his old killing ways, slashing his way back to Camp Crystal Lake. Also making their way to the lake, luckily for Jason, is a new batch of teenagers, including a fresh-faced Crispin Glover. This batch of teenagers is actually one of the best, I think, in the series. Don't get me wrong, there's nobody breaking any new ground apart from Crispin Glover's dancing here.
Don't think you got it made, no, you're wrong.
And, out of the teenagers, he's clearly the only one of this that is going to go on to have a rather large career of the 1980s. Anyway, however, where I think the differences lie between the teens in this film and Part 3 and Part 2 and all that, I genuinely think the writing is better here. And Barney Cohen's dialogue, he really, listening to the audio commentary on the Blu-ray of this film when I watched it this time around, he did really want to step away from this kind of sitcom-esque dialogue that was in the previous films. This new group of teens have rented a house right next door to another house on Camp Crystal Lake owned by the Jarvis family, including 11-year-old Tommy Jarvis, played by Corey Feldman. Now, Corey Feldman was already an established child actor in the early 1980s. However, this film and Gremlins, also released in 1984, just catapulted him into stardom. He was a teen idol of the 1980s. Spielberg produced Gremlins and then also, would cast Corey Feldman in The Goonies in 1985. You got Stand By Me in 1986, and then obviously The Lost Boys, which I've reviewed as well, in the best year of cinema, 1987. Now, Corey Feldman is clearly one of the best things about this film, and his performance as Tommy just makes sure that character becomes a big part of the Friday the 13th mythology over the next couple of films. I think the family dynamic actually added into this film is something very different to the other Friday the 13th. We never really get a sense of any sort of adult that is sane in the Friday the 13th films until the final chapter, where we have the sister and Tommy Jarvis's mother and the family dog. It's all very pleasant, and it helps the film have its two contrasting locations of the family home and then this teen house full of your normal Friday the 13th sex and drugs and all that sort of stuff. I really do think this film is attempting to do something different. Not break the mould, but at least try to make mould a bit more interesting for the audience to watch being created. Now, this film was conceived and produced and filmed as the final chapter. It's what it was called, and that mainly came from producer Frank Mancuso Jr. He'd done the previous couple of films as producer, and he was really trying to strike out and make a career outside of the Friday the 13th films, and he felt that he wasn't being respected, as that was his only film credit so far. So he thought, right, I'm going to draw a line under this, and we're going to kill off Jason, and I can go off and do bigger and better things. And also, Paramount was under increasing pressure from the MPAA from 1978 and kind of like all the horror films of the 1970s. By the 1980s, kind of with television and VHS explosion, violence was a lot more readily available in homes, and so the American board of censors were very, very keen to try and cut out as much of it as possible. And this film especially went back and forth numerous times between the editors, the producers and the people at Paramount and the ratings board in America, cutting out a single frame and then sending it back and then saying no and sending it back, and it just essentially, this film had to be released 2 to 3 weeks after it was finished filming. So there was numerous editors working on it, trying to get the golden R-rated certificate certificate in the shortest amount of time possible with, we're still maintaining that level of gore that Friday the 13th fans wanted. So this film series that they'd created rather cheaply and was still trying to make rather cheaply became a bit of a headache for Paramount, and so really they wanted to move on to other things. The new director here, taken over from Steve Miner on the other two films, is Joseph Zito, who's made a horror film called The Prowler. And I think he does a really good job of making this a bit of a classier outing for Jason. That opening shot that I mentioned after the weird previous film's montage sequence is really fun. We for once return to the previous film's location and witness the aftermath of Jason's killing spree. And there is also more than just a couple of people in a scene. There's helicopters and ambulances and police cars, and this allows the camera to move all over the place between multiple moments of interest and action that's all on the screen at the same time, as we slowly wind our way towards the barn and see the body of Jason on the floor. I really like how we get this massive amount of commotion and noise and people and setup of the start of this film, and instead of choosing to follow the parade of emergency service vehicles as they leave Camp Crystal Lake, the camera almost returns to its starting position and just watches all the red flashing lights just disappear off into the distance as Camp Crystal Lake slowly descends back into silence. I think it's a really good opening. It's a lot more than just the crane movements and not very great cinematography, unfortunately, in parts 1, 2 and 3. I think they're just a bit too dark. This one feels a bit richer, and also that the darkness is intended to contain something that is sinister. A big part of this film also sees the return of special effects master Tom Savini, invited back by the director to kill off his creation of Jason Voorhees. With Tom Savini back, the kills are fantastic, and even though they are slightly neutered by the cuts enforced on this film, and sometimes you really do feel those edits in some of the kill sequences, they're fantastic to watch, and you can clearly see a step up from parts 2 and 3, where you have Tom Savini coming in some really fun practical effects that actually look genuinely good on screen. And also Tommy Jarvis's character is built as this kind of pseudo-autobiographical Tom Savini who, grew up making these effects and masks and stuff, and so Tommy is also in that world. And again, this adds extra layers and extra characterization to characters that in the previous Friday films we just don't get. Friday the 13th, the final chapter, is definitely one of the high points of the series, and I think it adds a really nice bow to the first 4 films of the series. And yeah, if the film series had ended here, it would have ended on a high, I think. However, Frank Mancuso Jr.'s plans of walking away from the series did actually happen. However, Paramount couldn't walk away from Friday the 13th. When the money started rolling in for the final chapter, less than a year later, a new Friday the 13th, Part 5, was in the cinema. But more on that one later. And actually, this year we get 2 Friday the 13ths. So, join me in October when I review Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning. Now, my next 501 must-see movies film is one that I've wanted to review for a couple of years, and that is The Sweet Smell of Success. Oh, it's amazing. Anyway, join me in a couple of weeks for my review of The Sweet Smell of Success. If you enjoy my reviews, please remember to subscribe and comment down below all of your thoughts about the Friday the 13th films, and let me know which films you'd like me to review next. I still have to finish my Halloween series. I said I was going to do it in time for Halloween Ends. That didn't happen. In fact, my review for Halloween 6 is already filmed, so why haven't I released it? I'll get onto it, I do promise that. But until next time, I'll say thank you very much for continuing to subscribe to this channel, and I will see you next time. Thank you very much. Goodbye.